Let's go!
Welcome back to Dr. Gina Primetime. I'm Karen Turk. Dr. Gina's off tonight. The attack on Israel seems to be escalating. For families in Tel Aviv with young children, the latest overnight attacks on the capital were probably the first time that parents had to wake their babies in a panic, rush to a bomb shelter, and try to explain what was happening. Since the last war with Hamas in 2014, Israel's capital has largely avoided bouts of fighting. Democratic leadership predominantly seems to be on the side of our closest ally, but as no surprise, the radical left is siding with the Palestinians. State Department spokesman Ned Price responded to a tweet by Representative Ilhan Omar in which she claimed that the deputy mayor of Jerusalem was supporting ethnic cleansing. Price fired back at reporters, stating that Omar's claim was not something that analysis supports. Omar also tweeted out criticism towards the White House for their support of Israel, stating that the American ally is the oppressive occupation. Of course, AOC has also jumped on the radical progressive anti-Israel bandwagon. She's claiming once again that Israel is occupying Palestine and criticizing Joe Biden for standing up in defense of Israel. Here's what Biden had to say about where the White House actually stands on this issue.
My national security staff and defense staff has been in constant contact with their counterparts in the Middle East, not just with the Israelis, but also with everyone from the Egyptians to the Saudis to the Emiratis, et cetera. And I had a conversation with Bibi Netanyahu not too long ago. I'll be putting out a statement very shortly on that. My expectation and hope is that this will be closing down sooner than later. But Israel has a right to defend itself when you have thousands of rockets flying into your territory. But I had a conversation for a while with the Prime Minister of Israel, and I think that my hope is that we'll see this coming to conclusion sooner than later.
Although Joe Biden has shown support for Israel in light of this attack, we really have taken a huge step backwards towards peace in the region. Although with President Trump, there was significant progress made in achieving peace in the Middle East. Just 8 months ago, President Trump announced that the historic peace agreement between the UAE and Israel was going to be enacted. Remember this?
Not since the Israel-Jordan peace treaty was signed more than 25 years ago has so much progress been made towards peace in the Middle East. By uniting two of America's closest and most capable partners in the region, something which said could not be done, this deal is a significant step towards building a more peaceful, secure, and prosperous Middle East.
Those certainly were better days in so many ways. That peace accord really should have been a shift towards peace in the region. But under the new administration, it seems like we're reliving the 2014 conflict during the Obama administration. One of the people that was instrumental in brokering this historic peace accord is here to give us some insight on what's next. Harley Lippman, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Do you think that the Middle East partners that were a part of this accord are going to step in and step up for Israel and peace? Word is that Egyptian delegates have arrived to attempt to negotiate a ceasefire.
Yeah, I do think so. You know, that there's been a tectonic shift in the Middle East, and Israel and the United States has closer friends now. United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Egypt, even Saudi Arabia. And all of them respect the territorial integrity of each other's nations. And none of them are viewing the attacks from Hamas on Israel favorably. These nations see that this is a violent, aggressive action on behalf of Hamas, who are intentionally trying to kill civilians. Whereas the Israelis, who have the military power to basically wipe out Hamas in Gaza, are trying to surgically take out just the bad guys, the terrorists. But since these people embed themselves with civilians, invariably there's going to be civilian casualties. But the Israelis really go out of their way to avoid civilian casualties, even at the risk of their own soldiers and fighters. And that's the difference right then and there. And that one side is trying to deliberately kill innocent civilians. And I think if we stand for anything, it's that no matter what your grievance is, you don't deliberately try to kill innocent people.
Yeah, it's pretty unreal that we have some congressional leaders that are turning their backs on our closest allies and really seemingly are supporting terrorism here. I mean, it's really a disturbing fact, is it not?
Very much so. You know what I'd say to those people, AOC or Ilhan Omar? I'd say just stand up for your beliefs. You say you're a liberal progressive, which above all speaks to tolerance. Hamas is against women, is against gays, is against democracy. They're against the other. Anyone who is not like them, they're against. It's a dictatorship. It's corrupt. They don't take care of their own people. They spend hundreds of millions on all kinds of weapons to kill people in Israel while neglecting the welfare of their own people. So on every measurable level that a liberal progressive would value a cause or a movement, Hamas fails the test. And on every measurable level, Israel passes the test. While Israel is not flawless, they make mistakes and they are flawed. By any standards, they speak up for human rights. Palestinians have a Supreme Court to go to. They are thriving in Israel. 80% of all the pharmacies in Israel are owned by Palestinians. And they're doing very well. And what happened here is that Hamas took advantage of what would be in any other country a landlord-tenant dispute. The people who own this homes in East Jerusalem, their families had bought it legally from the people who owned that land, which were the Turks for hundreds of years. The Ottoman Empire controlled that land of the Middle East until 1947. So they bought the land legally and worked hard to build it up. And basically you have squatters staying there who refuse to pay rent over decades. And that's what really this is all about. But Hamas is cleverly manipulating this, trying to make this an issue of Israeli difficulty in letting worshippers go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is a very big holy site for the Muslim world, the third biggest holy site after Mecca and Medina and Jerusalem. So they're trying to manipulate this to get to improve their standing among the Palestinians. They're doing it partly to punish Abbas because he canceled elections. There hasn't been elections in 15 years because he knew he would lose. And everybody knew that Hamas's standing would increase, so he's doing it for that reason. He's also trying to make sure that the Israeli party, Arab party called Ra'am, Muslim Brotherhood, does not join the coalition because they don't want that to happen, because they feel to give legitimacy to an Israeli government when you have a militant Islamic group joining it, even though they're a very, very small part of that. And lastly, they're testing the Biden administration. And they feel emboldened. And we all know where this is all really coming from is Iran. Iran funds them, supplies them, guides them, trains them. They are doing that not only in Lebanon with Hamas, but just look at, not only in Gaza with Hamas, but just look at Lebanon. The last war with Lebanon, which is controlled by Hezbollah, an Islamist group controlled by Iran, they had 4,000 missiles, which only was able to hit northern Israel, had a very light payload, and was highly inaccurate. Now, conservatively,
that actually brings up a really good point. I want to bring that up real quick. You know, Tel Aviv hasn't been attacked in many, many years. The fact that they're now attacking Tel Aviv instead of just northern Israel really seems to be a bold move on the part of the Palestinians. Do you think that this action that they're taking in bombing Tel Aviv is going to lead to more action and retaliation for that?
Well, Israel used to have a more aggressive policy of deterrence, which means if you hit Israel once, they'll hit you back 5 times harder. And that has worked very successfully for decades. Over the years, they have relaxed that policy, and they're not hitting Hamas back, in this case, as hard as they could have or as hard as they used to. And I just heard on your program, President Biden said he anticipates an early resolution. This to me means that Biden is putting huge pressure on the parties to cut this out. And so they're putting huge pressure on the Arab nations there, on probably Russia and China, to put pressure on Hamas. And he's putting pressure on Iran to say, you've got to stop this. But this is a real test of the Biden administration to see how do they deal with this type of conflict when Iran is clearly trying to murder innocent people in Israel. And there are American tourists there. These rockets could end up killing Americans that are in Israel. So this really reveals who Hamas is. It reveals that Iran is looking to kill as many Israelis as possible, and as they say themselves all the time, ultimately destroy the Jewish nation.
Yeah, those are all great points, and let's all hope that this gets better before it gets worse. Thank you so much for your insight, Harley.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great having you on. Up next, China is violating human rights, and the entire province of Xinjiang is being compared to an outdoor prison. United Nations members are calling for action after human rights groups were denied access. When UN members met, they were urged beforehand not to participate in the meeting, with China calling it an anti-China event. We'll be back in a minute with more Dr. Gina Primetime.
Real America's Voice presents Smackdown with Daryl Scott.
What were you doing? Looking for a missing shelf in your bookcase? Putting it under a chair, cushioning it, bottomed out? You were using it to level a table leg? And lose the plastic bag, man. What did you do? You went to the self-pay checkout counter and put it in the bag yourself?
Don't miss Smackdown, Saturdays at 7 p.m. Eastern.